So you mentioned some signs of stress for ball pythons. Is that across the board for pretty much all snakes?
Yeah, I mean, there are some snakes that are a lot more active, and so what's restless for one snake is not restless for another. But generally speaking, you know, if they're just never simmering down and wandering all over the place, like, that's definitely going to be an indicator that something is wrong and they're not content. I am biased because I'm bothered by the way that, I mean, you know, it's not like spider or wobble are new things, right? We've known about them basically since the morph came into the pet trade. And because there is no evidence that they're suffering or having a hard, I mean, they thrive in captivity. And so I've never had a problem with them, and most of the reptile hobby hasn't, though obviously not everybody wants a spider ball python. I am bothered by the fact that in the last few months, the narrative has been really, really shaped by a sample size of one snake that was a rescue that comes from unknown upbringing, and it has a fairly severe wobble. And that one example has made it so, you know, whenever somebody posts a picture, you know, I produce a clutch of spider ball pythons, there's going to be a ton of people all over them saying you shouldn't support them in any way, and they're a terrible breeder, and they hate animals and all this stuff, when that is so contrary to the actual evidence that exists. I mean, you can find a sample size of one of anything that's doing terribly in captivity. I mean, the spider ball python is one of the easiest snakes to keep successfully in captivity that there is. They're going to survive on a higher rate. I mean, if you give the same snakes to the same keepers, the spider ball python is probably one of the top 5 to 10 snakes you could possibly give to somebody if you wanted it to live. And yet we're cool with the snakes that people kill all the time. Green tree pythons, rainbow boas, they can be great pet snakes, but people are killing them constantly because they're more difficult to keep in captivity. They're hard to keep alive, and the only reason to have one is because you like the color and temperament of those snakes more than the snakes that are easier to keep alive. And the snakes are suffering for it in many, many instances. And I do not like that. And if I could stop that, I would. But I also think that people that are informed should be free to get them and show them a great life. And this is one of the best you could get. And it bugs me. I am bugged. But I've made a decision a long time ago that I will let evidence completely eclipse the way that I feel about something. And so if there's evidence to the contrary, I've committed myself to accepting that evidence. It's just, to my knowledge, there is no such evidence.
You said that oftentimes spiders can make better captives.
Oh yes, than non-spider ball pythons?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Than a lot of different species. Actually.
Yes, so many.
So do they eat like a boa? Do they?
They at least have the reputation for being outstanding feeders for ball pythons, and that is probably the biggest problem with ball pythons, is that they're notoriously not good feeders. And the thing about it is that I think a lot of people don't realize with breeding of snakes and breeding of animals in general, and we brought it up a little bit with Runty McGillicuddy, is that a lot of animals fail to thrive, and a fairly large percentage of them won't ever start eating on their own. This is probably one of the leading killers of baby ball pythons. You know, a lot of them are going to starve themselves to death because they will never feed. And I don't have enough evidence one way or another, but if the reputation that spider ball pythons have is accurate, they are probably less likely to do that. And in that case, they are better pet snakes. They are better suited to the captive environment than our non-spider ball pythons.
It's based on their environment, and their environment is a human house in an enclosure and not the wild.
Absolutely. Let's take a look at Sinatra because he's great. right? This coloration has not done well in the wild. Because, ball pythons are dark because they're blending in with dark backgrounds. This guy doesn't blend in. He gets eaten all the time. And that sucks, right? This is terrible wild type coloration. But in captivity, we see that and we go, well, that's spectacular. I love that and it's beautiful. And a snake like this is way more likely to breed than is a wild type ball python in captivity. And as a result, this coloration is doing much better than is wild type. I suspect within the next 5 to 10 years, you will be hard pressed to get a wild type ball python. Sort of like you can't find a wild type leopard gecko anywhere anymore. It's because this is very well suited to our captive environment. Not that they actually do better. Spider might actually do better in terms of survival in addition to just we like them and so we pick them to breed, which is just unbelievable.
If you were to bet on the leading cause of strong wobble, your bet would be on care, husbandry?
Based on what I've seen, I have never seen an example of a snake where its early life is well documented and it was extremely well taken care of, and then it developed an extreme wobble. I'm open to the possibility that this can happen. I've seen no documented cases of this ever, and I've now raised up several spider ball pythons without having this problem, and the one, well, that's not even true. I've taken in several rescue spider ball pythons that I know came from a really good house, and they were well taken care of, and they're all excellent. I have one that I have no idea what its upbringing was, and its wobble was the only really severe wobble I've ever seen in person. Severe wobble isn't common, and like I said, I've never seen a case of it where we know that its upbringing was good. They're all rescues. And just to add to that, as you saw Emily on Snake Discovery, she recently received back one of her garter snakes that doesn't have spider in it. Right? It has no genetic reason to have any sort of neurological condition, but due to care, it had developed a neurological condition. And a lot of times, with proper care, they get better, but sometimes they don't. I took in a bearded dragon years ago that had been taken care of very, very poorly. And she couldn't walk very well, and she just shook, especially when there was food involved, just like a spider with severe wobble will do. Neurological conditions are not uncommon among animals that have received very, very poor husbandry. And if you've already got wobble, which causes you to act a little bit differently, but it's not debilitating in any way. But if you've got that combined with a severe neurological condition due to poor care, you probably do really wonky stuff. And if I had to guess what is going on with those extreme cases of wobble, that would be my guess. That is just what a husbandry caused neurological condition looks like in a snake that already has wobble.
So in all of yours, you officially have said that none of them have had any decrease in quality of life due to any kind of severe wobble or anything that they've had.
Nothing measurable. Their accuracy on strikes is a little bit lower, but again, they're in the captive environment, so I give them round 2. That is a big difference. In the wild, that could be a bad deal, because if you're missing opportunities to feed, you probably don't survive as often, and even if you do, you don't have the energy to breed as often. But in captivity, you miss, and well, it's still a frozen thawed rat, and I'm happy to shake it for you again. And they love to eat, and so they don't get discouraged by that. And if you're shaking, I've seen examples, I guess, of people saying that they hit the sides all the time, or they'll hit their own body. Which, that's just, you're really bad at offering frozen thawed rodents, because all ball pythons miss a fairly high percentage of the time, and if you're setting them up in a situation where they're going to slam right into the side of the enclosure or into their own body, dangle it elsewhere. Alright, that's sort of on you, because, spiders may do it more, but they all do it a lot.
Is your arm thing genetic?
I don't know.
Is it something else?
Well, so here's the thing. My parents don't have it, and my kids don't have it. Mm-hmm. So it can't be dominant. Mm-hmm. Could be recessive or controlled by multiple genes. But so far I have no indication that it's genetic. It's environmental. That's kind of strange, though.
I'm going to assume it's genetic and probably tell you not to breed anymore.
Okay. Thank you.
It seems like, because going to my neurologist, I was having issues with trembling.
Mm-hmm.
And when he did a bunch of tests on me, and he asked me if anyone else did it in my family, and I have it on both sides, my mom and my dad's side. And he said that, oh, well, you have what's called a familial shake. Genetically, some people just are trembly. I just think it's interesting that we have people that have these genetic traits where you have like a familial shake or something like that. It doesn't mean my quality of life isn't bad. You know, life is still very much worth living. It's just a kind of a quirky thing.
Yep, just a little different. My arms, I don't know if we've mentioned this before, but my arms don't flip over, so I can't touch my shoulders. And when I was in ROTC, I couldn't salute properly. So when I had my physical, I asked the doctor, and like, can you explain what's going on here with my arms? And so that I could explain it to people who were upset about my salute, and they said, it's just different. I was a little disappointed by that answer, but sometimes we are a little bit different. Different isn't always bad. The other thing I want to talk about, it was a point that Michelle made. We aren't breeding a population here in captivity to release into the wild. So the whole question is, how do they do in captivity? A few years ago, I was actually part of a study where we were looking at the jaw morphology of a fish called a June sucker. And June suckers are endemic to here in Utah, and they're an endangered species. And one of the problems that we have is we've altered the rivers where they go up to breed. And so even though these fish live for a long time and we've still got adults down in the lakes, we haven't seen any new recruitment. We haven't seen any babies born in decades. And to prevent them from going extinct, we've been breeding them in fish hatcheries and then re-releasing them. But what we noticed was a lot of them had a jaw morphology more similar to the Utah sucker, which is a different species of sucker with which they can hybridize. And so we're running into this question of, are we releasing June suckers into the lake, or are we releasing hybrid suckers into the lake? And so, the study that we did, and I wrote the paper for this, was all about analyzing which breeding stock actually represent the wild type morphology for re-releasing into the wild. And if we were talking about re-releasing these snakes into the wild, then yes, we would absolutely want to avoid anything that is neurologically or morphologically different from what we find in the wild, because that actually seems to be the coloration that works in the wild. And if we release a whole flock of snakes that don't exhibit those phenotypes, we're likely to weaken the population, at least for a long time, until selection can eliminate those alleles that we introduced into the population. If we were talking about something like that, this would be a completely different story. But as it stands, we are just talking about the snakes that we have in captivity. And so the only question is, how do these snakes do in captivity?